Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you're listening to this. Thanks for that, by the way. I can barely stand my own voice. I don't know how you're going to get through this. And I don't know how I'm going to get through this when we're listening to get to it in class. Either way, today you'll be tuning into another episode with the Milk Duds. But today I'm flying solo. So, Milk Dud? Singular? Anyways, uh, as always, for my lactose intolerance friends, make sure you take a few lactates because this episode is going to be crazy. Because who wants to talk about a boring book? In this episode, we'll be discussing A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen, a tale of drama, tragedy, deception, betrayal, the type of things you'd expect in a drama, as well as fragile masculinity and a feminist stance. But before we do that, let's get to know a little bit more about the author. So Henrik Ibsen is a Norwegian playwright that wrote his plays for British audiences. He was exiled from Norway, and in that time that he was exiled, he achieved great literary merit. It was while he was in Germany that he wrote A Doll's House, and it was an acclaimed work. So to sort of summarize the play, I'd like to focus on a few characters, one of them being Nora especially. When she's first introduced in Act 1, she's introduced as a very immature woman, sort of childlike in the way she behaves and acts. She is labeled as a woman and characterized as a woman who doesn't know how to manage money, who is a spendthrift, according to her husband, and who's very deceptive and manipulative and lies a lot about the smallest of things. Her husband asks if she had bought any macaroons, a simple dessert, to which she says she hasn't, even though she did. And being that she lied about such a small thing, it makes you wonder, is she a compulsive liar? Why did she lie about something so small? Is it that Torvald reacts so greatly and so strongly about certain things that she would rather him not know altogether, afraid of how he'll react? The stereotypical image of a woman who cannot control her spending habits and relies on the guidance of a man to correct her behavior evolves as we continue through Act 1. Christine Lind believes that Nora knows nothing of sacrifice or hard work. However, Nora objects to such an opinion, as she reveals that she had taken out a loan to save Torvald's life. She speaks of her actions, as well as including the work that she's done in order to pay the debt off, with such pride, which can probably be due to the fact that she has some independence, as well as she has a purpose that goes beyond the domestic realm. However, her pride is completely shattered as she talks with Krogstad, the villain of the play. He decides to blackmail her in order to keep his job at the bank, while using the loan as leverage, since he has figured out that she had forged her father's signature on the loan. Forgery is a crime, and she needed the approval of a man in order to get the loan, given that it is in the Victorian era. Following this encounter, Nora does try to convince Torvald to not fire Krogstad. However, it is to no avail. Torvald goes on a little rant, denouncing Krogstad for his immoral behavior, especially his crime, which was forgery. Ironically enough, the same crime that Nora has committed. Additionally, Torvald also goes on to say how children or adults that lead an immoral life have their mother to blame, essentially putting all the responsibility of teaching the morals on the mother rather than on the father, or splitting it equally between both parents. This frightens Nora, and she does not want to be around her children, afraid that she will also corrupt them. In Act 2, Nora's mental state and sanity is greatly declining. She is so frantic and so worried about Torvald finding out that she begins talking to herself, and it's quite noticeable in her patterns. She even talks about wanting to rip an expensive dress, probably out of frustration, or because the dress symbolizes wealth, and wealth has so far been the source of all of her issues. Beyond this, after this conversation, she also talks with Christine Lind, worried about how she won't be able to fix this problem, and worried so deeply about how Torvald will react when he finds out, suspecting that he won't be forgiving. After speaking to him about Krogstad and seeing how Torvald was denouncing Krogstad for forgery, she feels that there is no hope for her anymore. Christine tries to calm her down and says she will talk to Krogstad, implying that they had quite an amicable relationship in the past. Once they part, we are introduced with an interaction between Nora and Dr. Rank, something we have yet to see. The interaction, in all honesty, was quite uncomfortable and quite confusing. Nora introduced Dr. Rank as a family friend, a close family friend, but she did not say how close this man was to her. He basically proclaimed more than a platonic love for Nora, and she doesn't really acknowledge it. She tries to bring the light to their conversation. She literally brings a lamp and turns it on, kind of almost symbolizing her bringing this once hidden feelings that Dr. Rank had to light, to truth, to which she doesn't really respond very favorably, though she does show him his stockings. So in some ways she does sort of enchant or delight the conversation, though the the discomfort and the awkwardness is still very there. Moving on from this, Krogstad comes into the picture. Nora was able to convince Dr. Rank to distract Torvald while she talks to Krogstad, and Krogstad makes it official. He basically says that he's going to tell Torvald in a letter all that's happened because he's been fired. Nora was unable to convince Torvald to not do it, and as she tries to explain this to Krogstad, he doesn't care to listen or bother to listen, since he's lost his job, which he was using to build his reputation again. Nora has definitely lost all hope, and things are looking grim for her. Once he leaves and Torvald comes out, Nora tries to buy time by pretending that she doesn't know her dance routine that she has to perform later, the Tarantella. She performs sort of a frantic and crazed dance, probably a reflection and an extension of how she feels internally, and convinces Torvald to not look at his mailbox and to spend the whole night teaching her how to dance again. And the act 2 sort of ends on a grim note, as Nora says that she only has a few hours to live. Probably she did, and this kind of shows how dark her thoughts are getting. She did sort of mention thoughts of suicide and drowning herself in a lake, and I think that kind of shows that what we've seen of Torvald is not all that there is to him. For her to dread so much how he will react that she would rather kill herself is quite extreme, and kind of speaks to his character as well. Not only that, but it also can be metaphorical in that in a few hours, her whole life is going to be completely different, and the whole life she once led is going to be in the past, and she won't be able to revive it again. In Act 3, it opens with a conversation between Krogstad and Mrs. Lind. It actually turns out that Mrs. Lind was supposed to marry Krogstad, but left him at the altar for a wealthier man. That is quite understandable, given that Mrs. Lind had to look after her family, and money outweighed the love she perhaps felt for him. However, by the end of the conversation, Krogstad seems to be different in character, and a great indicator of that change is the fact that he offers to take back the letter from that he had given to Torvald that revealed the truth. And this is where Mrs. Lind irritated me, because she came off super fake and was like, no, Torvald needs to know. Leave the letter in there. And I was like, Mrs. Lind is canceled because she's been a fake friend. Nora's sanity has been dwindling, and she, even though there's the opportunity to kind of save Nora, she decides not to. However, she's not completely canceled because it somehow worked. Now, after the conversation, we go to Torvald and Nora. Torvald is basically, in my eyes, sexually harassing Nora. He keeps pushing her and pushing her beyond what she is comfortable with and what she doesn't want to do, and justifies his actions based on their marriage. He says that he's her husband and that she's his wife and she should do as he wants. And he kind of goes on to explain his creepy attraction with her and these little creepy things he does while he's staring at her and watching her dance. However, Dr. Rank surprisingly comes to the rescue and stops this awkward interaction, much to Torvald's dismay, of course. It is also in this time where Dr. Rank reveals, in secret of course, that he is in fact dying and that he won't have much time left. It's sort of a dark moment and very solemn moment between Nora and Dr. Rank, as they're the only ones that know what he is referring to. And Nora goes on to light his cigar, which serves as an innuendo, considering that Nora, a young, beautiful woman, is bringing some spark to an old, dying man's life that arouses him and gives him some sort of pleasure and happiness to his otherwise mundane life. While Dr. Rank and Nora were conversing, Torvald had gone through his mailbox and read his letters. What Nora has been dreading the most has finally came, and Torvald basically explodes on her, saying how she was irresponsible and reckless and also degrading her father, saying that she got his qualities and that they don't think. Basically, he is disrespecting her because his image and his role and position as the manager of a bank is being threatened by this loan. And he does not hold back when he's talking to Nora. Nora's bubbly and talkative self is very quiet and just takes all of it in. Then a maid comes in with a note to which Torvald demands to read, and Krogstad explains everything. Torvald finally calms down, apologizes for his words to Nora, and hopes that everything will go back to normal. But Nora is not okay with this, and she is not going to follow the script at all. In other terms, Nora was like, I let you talk, so now it's my time, and you're going to listen to me as I talk. She goes on to sort of explain how she's felt, how she's lived an unfulfilled and dormant life, being the doll of her father, then being the doll of her husband, being their toy, bringing them joy, and conforming to it, keeping her opinions to herself to keep the peace and to make them happy. However, she's lived a life without purpose and without fulfillment. And she sees that after Torvald blowing up on her, after finding out the truth, she realizes that their marriage is nothing, is meaningless. Torvald wasn't able to see the good that Nora was trying to do and cared more about his reputation and his image than he did about their marriage. It wasn't until the note that Krogstad later gave them that he finally calmed down. And Nora sees this, and she doesn't take his apology, which is great because it's a major character growth for Nora. She stands up for herself. She has this great epiphany and realizes that her life isn't what she's wanted it to be, and that she isn't going to continue living as his doll. She's going to go away and find her purpose and find out who she is, because her whole life she hasn't been able to do such. It is such a triumphant and powerful moment, and such a character growth that is so well appreciated and so unexpected for the time. Now, after that brief, but not necessarily brief synopsis of the play, it's important to analyze some of the characters. Nora has undoubtedly grown. She went from a woman that was characterized as immature, childish, and frantic and worried about her husband to being an independent and strong woman who has put herself first and who has rejected what society has placed upon her to think, has placed upon her. Society in the Victorian era has told her that the only thing she should care about is being a mother and being a wife. And she's decided that that is not the most important thing to her. The most important thing is knowing who she is and finding some fulfillment and purpose in her life. And that does not mean continuing pretending to be happy with a loveless and superficial marriage to Torvald. Not only that, but Krogstad has grown a lot. Our villain of the play has sort of, in my opinion, was just another character driving the play. To me, he has also grown a lot. He did not have to write that extra note and deliver it to the Helmer's house. He could have gone on living his new life with Christine and been okay and kept moving, but instead he decided to be considerate, to be compassionate, and to help Nora, something that he would have never done before. This man was very superficial, and his main motivation for wanting to keep his job at the bank was for his image, was to appear as a respectable person and try and maintain that appearance of respectability and try to earn his reputation back, rather than changing his character. Yet at the end, he has changed his actions. He has changed his character through his actions, which was that compassion for Nora. And it is in this play that we add dimension to Torvald himself, a man that appeared somewhat understanding, level-headed, reasonable, practical, turned out to be someone who was very creepy, very aggressive, very superficial, ironically enough. Him denouncing Krogstad for his sins was something of hypocrisy for Torvald to do, given the fact that he only cared about his reputation, and also trying to place himself above Krogstad, making himself superior as far as morals go, as if he has never done any wrong in his life either. We have seen that Torvald is not that same person that we were led on to believe in Act 1. Christine Lind sort of remains one note throughout the play, always striving to do what's best. And even though I said she was canceled, her making the truth be known, Nora was able to experience this epiphany, this awakening, and it facilitated her to want to go on and grow. Now that we have gotten some background on the author, a brief but not very brief summary of the play, as well as some analyzation of the characters and their actions in the play, we can finally go on to our main topic of this episode of this podcast, which is, what gain does Nora make throughout the play? What does she still need to learn to carry out her final act? And is it a triumph or a failure or both? The gain that Nora makes throughout the play is finding that strength and independence within herself to be able to commit and do this final act of the play, where she rejects Torvald and puts herself first. It is no easy task, and she was definitely not encouraged by society to put herself first. Ultimately, what Nora needed to carry out her final act was not the courage. She's always had the courage within her. It took a lot of courage for her to forge her father's signature, risk being caught, in order to take out that loan to save her husband's life. So it's clear that she's had it within her the whole time. What she does need to learn to carry out her final act was that epiphany, that awakening, that realization that the life she's been living has been superficial and is meaningless. How she cannot have happiness if she's not happy with who she is. And she cannot continue living without some sense of purpose, without a purpose that goes beyond just being a mother. Though there is nothing wrong with motherhood, she doesn't know who she is, and in the sense she hasn't really been a mother. It's been the job of the maid to raise her children. In some ways, she also treats her children as dolls, the same way Torvald and her father have treated her as dolls. playing with them only when she wants to make herself happy. And it's only been temporary. So ultimately what she needed was that awakening and to see the truth. Torvald found out the truth through paper, what Nora had done. But Nora had finally opened her eyes to see the reality of her marriage and to see the real man and the real person Torvald was after 8 years of being together. And whether it's a triumph or a failure or both, I would ultimately categorize this as a great triumph. Whether I would categorize Nora's final act in the play as a triumph, a failure, or both, I would undoubtedly characterize it as an act of triumph. Nora has taken great power within herself to decide that she deserves this. She deserves to find out who she is and to realize that she's had enough, that she can't keep up pretending and playing this little game, playing a game of appearances and of formalities that came with living in the Victorian era and pretend that she is happy when she really isn't. And I feel that that is no easy decision to come by. Not only that, but Nora has just grown so much as a person as well throughout the play. And part of her growth was this final act, this epiphany, and her follow-through with the awakening that she experienced. And her continuing and following through with it only contributes to her growth and her expected growth, as you would expect for her, given that she's leaving in order to find out who she is, find out what she likes, and stop lying to herself, essentially. I don't see this as a failure at all. The only person I see losing is Torvald. He himself is someone who needs to grow and needs to change because he is an imperfect person, just as Nora is and just as Krogstad is, despite how much he tries to consider himself morally superior to Krogstad and Nora. He himself has his own imperfections, and because of those imperfections, he lost his wife. That is to his failure, it is to her gain, because she has left an imperfect marriage and, in all honesty, an unfulfilling and fake and unhappy marriage. Whatever happiness that they did have was nothing, I would consider nothing more than superficially happy. There was nothing of substance or substantially loving and worthwhile about the relationship. And what reinforces this opinion for me is, especially when when Torvald was completely disrespecting Nora's boundaries as far as how comfortable she was with him touching her and them being intimate or having an intimate moment. He completely disregarded how she felt and her consent in the matter. So, of course, I consider this a great triumph for Nora, but a failure for Torvald. Particular quotes that I want to focus on that I found especially powerful in the last act it was really hard to choose one, so I'm going to focus on this segment of their conversation when Nora is about to leave, essentially, and I just really think it's very powerful, and she really talks very strongly. So here it goes. Helmer says to her, oh wait, I want to start this. So here it goes. Helmer: I would gladly work night and day for you, Nora, bear sorrow and want for your sake, but no man would sacrifice his honor for the ones he loves. To which Nora responds, it is a thing hundreds of thousands of women have done. That ties back into this theme of self-sacrifice that's in the play. Nora also has put herself at risk and sacrificed a lot to take out that loan. The courage that it took to build up to do so, and all this worry and having to put her mental and her sanity essentially at risk just to make sure Helmer would be alive, and for him to sort of not necessarily slap her in the face, but in some ways it's a huge disrespect to her and chastise her and condemn her for taking out the loan in the first place that was crucial for him in order to survive. It must have felt like such a great disrespect and a great betrayal, essentially, to Nora. Just as Helmer felt in some ways betrayed that Nora would go behind his back and do this, I feel that Nora felt betrayed that he wouldn't at least try and understand where she was coming from or see her good intentions in it, and cared more about his self-image. And this whole thing where he says, oh, I couldn't put up my honor for you, and to which Nora says, hundreds of thousands of women have done so. Mothers do this a lot. Mothers, wives, and she essentially is almost saying that in some ways she's had to put up her honor, her forging her father's signature for the loan would have, and that to come out would have definitely ruined her name. And she might have considered that as well as she was doing it. And image is a big thing in the Victorian era, but she still took out the loan anyways for Helmer's sake. And Helmer also goes on to say, oh, you think and talk like a heedless child, to which Nora responds, maybe, but you neither think nor talk like the man I could bind myself to. That line alone was just so powerful to me. You can clearly see that Helmer or Torvald views Nora as a child, as immature, as the woman that he knew and that he married in the beginning of that he was with in Act 1, where she did act sort of childlike and was immature. But the Nora that we see in Act 3 is nothing like that childlike woman that you saw in Act 1. And then Nora goes on to say, as soon as your fear was over, and it was not fear for what threatened me, but for what might happen to you, when the whole thing was past as far as you were concerned, it was exactly as if nothing at all had happened. Exactly as before, I was your little skylark, your doll, which you would in future treat with doubly gentle care because it was so brittle and fragile. And as she gets up, she says, Torvald, it was then it dawned upon me that for 8 years I had been living here with a strange man and had borne him 3 children. Oh, I can't bear to think of it. I could tear myself into little bits. And in that, it clearly shows that she's, and in some ways at the last line, I kind of liken her tearing herself into bits as to her wanting to tear the dress into bits. They sort of have a sort of mirror image, in my opinion, at least from what I saw reading that line. Just as she wanted to tear her dress into bits around the beginning of Act 3, and how she says she wants to tear her the beginning of Act 2. May I correct myself? She wants to tear herself into bits right here at the end of Act 3 because in some ways Nora is similar to the dress in that they're very beautiful, in that they are high class in what it symbolizes. High society, and she just wants to tear that image apart because it's not her. Sure, she has grown up with the money, but she doesn't know who she is, and in that way, it's sort of like she's upset about what she's let herself, how she's let herself live, and live in this fantasy, in this fiction for so long. And also in that statement, she says that she realizes she's not a child because she can see that Torvald was only happy and forgave Nora because his image was no longer at risk. That was the only thing he cared about, and that was the only reason why he was upset in the first place, because of his image. And it just shows that their relationship was of no substance, because if he truly loved Nora, he wouldn't care about his image. He would just care that she's okay, and he would appreciate that she looked out for him and that she could see that she wasn't completely wrong in what she did. In some ways, I feel that also our author, Ibsen, is almost making a commentary on the society, Victorian society. If such heavy rules and regulations weren't in place, then Nora would be able to get a loan that was very crucial. It was very vital. It wasn't just to spend money on a car because they wanted. It was a big need to make sure that Torvald would be alive. And the fact that she couldn't get it because of these societal restrictions, that she needs the approval of a man, as if she doesn't have her own sense or her own responsibility, is almost insulting, and is the reason why she's also in that position in the first place. However, it also kind of begs to differ that even if there was those rules, seeing what kind of man Torvald is, would he feel emasculated by her taking out a loan? we've kind of established that he does have some sort of a fragile masculinity that can be seen in around Act 1 in the condescending nicknames he gives to Nora. And we can also see how toxic his masculinity is in Act 3, especially, where he is saying how after Nora had finished her dance, and he just kept insisting on touching her and kissing her, even though she wanted no part of it. So those were the quotes that I found particularly strong, because I felt like Nora really, truly did express herself and truly did expressed herself and truly revealed that lie she was living, and why Torvald being so upset hurt her. It wasn't because he yelled at her or because he was upset. The whole reason she felt so betrayed and so strongly about his reaction is because she can see that he only cared about his image and not about her, which was, I think, another character growth, because she's able to understand what's going on. It's not anything superficial or above the surface. She really analyzed this, and that's what facilitated her awakening and her deciding to make this huge decision into that she should find herself. Torvald saying this to Nora is him echoing the views and the beliefs of the Victorian era. Them seeing that a woman's sole purpose is to be a wife and a mother and to live in the domestic sphere and perform the roles associated with the domestic sphere and nothing else. And Nora's rebuttal is, in my opinion, where we see that feminist stance come out, and where she completely rejects the Victorian standards for women. And in her saying that she is first and foremost a reasonable human being, or that she will at least try to become one, because she has been fed this idea that she can only be a mother and a wife and try to be the best mother and wife she can be, and that was it for her. But her experiencing this epiphany in her argument with Torvald in Act 3 shows that she has completely rejected that and tore away from that and is trying to find out who she is. So in some ways, I see this is where the feminist stance comes out, in my opinion. And I also see this as this is where I see the rejection of the era in which Ibsen lived in, that the domestic sphere and giving women only the domestic sphere to live in, to work in, and to base their lives off of is not enough. And that's also why I see Nora's final act as a triumph, because this whole thing, it shows that women cannot just be simply content with motherhood and with being a wife. Women need some outlet in order to express themselves, need something else, and that they are more than just mothers and wives, that they have more to them. They are complex, they are creative, they are intelligent, they are capable. And to limit them only to the domestic sphere is a gross injustice to society and to women themselves. They are cheating themselves by only limiting them to those roles. And that is why Nora has felt that she has lived an unfulfilled life and a dormant life. And that is why she's trying to strive to grow and to know herself. So I really appreciated this quote, and I felt it was particularly powerful for those reasons. Some closing statements I'd like to make in this book are regards to self-discovery, moral development, and second chances. So I feel that Ibsen is trying to say that what makes a person a morally quote-unquote good is their honesty and being genuine. Krogstad was our villain, and we could attribute such qualities to him as being disingenuous and superficial, because he wanted the respect of others just based on physical stuff, on superficial stuff such as his job and keeping his job at the bank, rather than proving to people that he has changed in his actions. So rather than make a meaningful change through his conduct, he decided to do it through appearances, and that also facilitated his sort of villainous role in this play. And that also what makes people sort of dislike Torvald, because he is disingenuous. He is he is self-centered. He's only looking out for himself, and he also only cares about his image. And that is why Nora ultimately leaves him in the end. And also, I feel that self-discovery is also another important theme in this book, because that's what facilitates Nora's great triumph, as what I would call a great triumph in the end of Act 3, is her wanting to figure out who she is and give herself a purpose, because she cannot keep on living life without growth and continue to lie to herself that she is happy with something that is so blasé, something that is without substance. And I feel that people need self-discovery in order to find some fulfillment of their life, and that is what Ibsen is trying to get across. And also with regards to second chances and whether Ibsen feels that they are necessary or encouraged bad behavior, I feel that his stance on second chances are in regards to whether people deserve it or not. And on the basis of them deserving it is if they have proven that they are worthy of it, and that comes with being genuine. Ibsen, we see Mrs. Lynde trying to get a second chance at life after her husband has died and after her children have left her, and she is worthy of it because she has worked all her life, and she has worked all her life for other people, so she is a genuine person who could use this second chance. We categorize Cort Krogstad as undeserving of a second chance because he is disingenuous, especially in the eyes of Torvald, where he has not admitted to his crimes, and he continues to lead such a bad lifestyle, and that he's continuing to blackmail Nora in order to try to receive respectability, which is also ironic, considering that his actions are not matching up with what you would consider a respectable person. And as far as in the final act, when Nora is leaving Torvald and he wants a second chance, he is unworthy because he cannot prove that he will be a different person or that he is genuine and that he will change who he is. And he has admitted it because he said he would not give up his honor for Nora or for someone he loves, even though Nora would do that. And those are my closing statements of the book that I felt were really important to touch on and what Ibsen was trying to get across to his audience. That was it for our segment for today. Thank you for listening. I am your honorary Milkta Jalissa, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast, this episode. I hope you learned a little bit, and if you were trying to get some answers to this for this play that you haven't read and we're hoping to get some ideas. Sorry, I don't think I really provided much of that. It looks like you have to read the play yourself or maybe go to SparkNotes and try and get a better idea about what this play is about. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a lovely day or night, depending on when you listen to this.